In the back?
I've been reading recently a lot of sort of arguments between people who pirate video games and people who don't think we should pirate video games. And I've seen a lot of sort of bits of half-understood open source rhetoric coming out. Do you see more and more people sort of using very misunderstood open source ideals to justify what, from their worldview, is actually stealing what they want to say about it?
Well, so that's really more a question about how social contracts are constructed and negotiated on an ongoing basis. So the reason for most people give for not pirating a video game isn't like the economic reason of someone deserves a fair return for their work, or there will be underinvestment in video games if this doesn't allow. They don't talk like they work for the FTC, right? They usually say things like, game devs work hard and they make stuff that makes us like them and we like them too, and so you shouldn't deprive them and their families of income, right? It's not an argument about like an economist might make. It's an argument like you might make about your friends, right? You shouldn't don't spit on the sidewalk. My kid is crawling around on it. Can you take your cigarette over there? Like that. It's in that universe of arguments. So the problem is that we often try is that when we cross economic and social rhetoric, we often end up with stuff that's kind of incoherent, right? It just kind of stops making sense, because then people say, well, what about this company that makes lots of money? And then someone says, well, but it's full of individuals who you should have a social contract with. And then they say, well, what about this company that screwed us with their DRM? Doesn't that invalidate the social contract? Don't we have a duty now to punish them for their bad DRM? And I think that we need to get our act together and figure out whether we're talking about something social or economic, and whichever one that happens to be is what we should be focusing on. And I think that's why you get this kind of incoherent kind of open source rhetoric about this stuff.
Well, I think what I've been seeing are people who don't really understand it at all, but they say it because in their minds they think they are stealing, but they want to feel better about it.
Yeah, I mean, never underestimate the power of cognitive dissonance, right? But at the same time, I think that it's often the case that something that feels right, that has its own kind of internal good feeling, it's hard to understand theoretically why it's right until it's been happening for a while, right? Until you've been doing it for a while. I think that theories of action follow action. It's rare that they go in the other direction. So mixtapes, right? You can make all the arguments that you can make about why you shouldn't take software about mixtapes, and you can make all the arguments about why you should take software about mixtapes too. And I think that when mixtapes started, it was incoherent, right? It was like, I want to make mixtapes because they're a courting ritual in my generation. I mean, if it wasn't for mixtapes, my entire adolescence would have been celibate, right? But eventually, that turned into, wait a second, the ability to decide what order you listen to music in, or make a playlist, or share culture in this way is good for artists, but it's also good for us. It's part of how we do culture. And besides that, the record industry are giant bullies, and isn't there a levy on my media anyways? And it starts to turn into a more politicized realm, right? It goes from a kind of incoherent action to a much more coherent action. The civil rights struggle, right? Starts with, this feels wrong, and turns into, this is wrong. So theories follow action. Yep.
So with Europe adopting the three strikes policy, where do you think they're going to take that?
So Europe adopting three strikes. So three strikes is the idea that if you're accused of 3 acts of copyright infringement, we take away your household's internet access. And it's just come into law in the UK, it's come into law in France, it's been proposed in New Zealand, and it's a feature of a treaty that the US will be party to called the Anti-Counterfeiting Trade Agreement. So it's coming here too, and the Obama administration has intimated that they will pass that by executive decree without congressional debate. So it's really bad. I mean, it's really bad because the internet's not just a glorified way of getting software for free, right? It's not just a place where Police Academy movies live without a price tag on them. It's how we do everything else too. It's how we do political action. It's how we do health information. It's where we find out about nutrition. It's how our kids get better grades and go on to better schools. It's related to things like social mobility and civic engagement. All of those things arise from our use of the internet, and confiscating a whole family's internet because of something that one member is accused of is really disproportionate and bad. Where's it going to go now? Well, I think that in terms of the fight about three strikes, the thing that's on our side is that the longer it's around, the more people there are who are using the internet in ways that transcend just content, right? That matter to them, and where the qualitative difference between making a phone call and being able to, for example, leave a Skype line open between you and someone else for 10 hours, right, while you're at your desk. So it's like they're sitting next to you or behind you, and when you got a question, just go, John, I got a question. I was just staying with my friend Rail Dornfest, who works for Twitter. He's one of Twitter's lead programmers. They're in San Francisco. He's in Portland, and he does extreme programming, co-programming with another programmer, and they just leave Skype open between them all day, right? And it's as though he was sitting at the next desk, right? And so when they're working on shared screens, and they just talk to each other, and the more people there are who start to use that in lots of other ways that transcend just geeky programming, the more people there are who realize that so what, we took away your internet, you can always just make a phone call, is not a good answer. In fact, anyone who says, so what, it's just the internet, like, you can tell they have yet to have that aha moment, but it's coming. So it's been an hour, so maybe you two will be the last two questions, unless there's one more young person who'd like to ask a question, and then we'll break. So you and then you.